welcome to my class today. All right, we're going to do a class on the an introduction to hieroglyphics. Okay. Oh, I know that you guys probably all call me some different things, but for the sake of the class, because I recorded for YouTube, I'll go by. You can just call me Suit. For me, Suit. Okay. And I'm going to actually talk about this today, what that actually means. Okay. So if this is your first time joining me, I always suggest you guys bring notepads, bring something the right way, because I share a lot of information, and also anything that I say, I encourage you to go look it up. You know, go do some research on it, and see the things for yourself. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about hieroglyphics. These are some of the most common hieroglyphics that people are familiar with, which are the Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus. Okay. Here you see the Eye of Ra is generally associated with the right hand orientation, the right eye, and the Eye of Horus is generally associated with the left eye association. Some of the things that are associated with the Eye of Ra are going to be the sun, action, power, and the force of order, through sometimes violence, So the Eye of Ra was the eye of protection and an active eye, more active, while the Eye of Horus, in contrast, is a more passive eye. This is an eye that was thought by ancient Egyptians to ward off evil. It was thought to symbolize the moon, in opposed to the sun, Ra, the sun god Ra. Horus was thought to symbolize the moon, restoration, protection from bad, healing, wisdom, and inward awareness. Okay. So here we have the Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus. Okay. Now I'm going to go deeper into the Eye of Horus. This is the one that we're going to be talking about today. This is the one that generally people tend to see, and people tend to think of as the Eye of Horus, not the Eye of Ra. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the Eye of Horus. Okay. So Horus was the sun in ancient Egypt. They have tales like we have in whatever religion we practice. They have tales. So in ancient Egypt, Horus was the son of the Egyptian god Osiris and Isis. And Osiris, who was on the throne, he got killed by another god named Set. So Osiris's brother Set killed him for the throne, and Horus challenged Set for the throne. And during that challenge, Set ripped Horus's eye out. This is how the tale goes. He ripped Horus's eye out and broke it into pieces. Okay. So after he broke it into pieces, his eye was eventually restored by the Egyptian god Thoth, which is why it resembles restoration and whatnot. But this story is an analogy for other concepts, and we're going to get into what these concepts are. What does it mean for Set to rip out your eye and separate it into pieces, and then it being restored by Thoth? These are analogous stories to spiritual concepts, and also some of the gods that they believed in. Let's get into it. Let's go into it a little bit deeper. So also, the Eye of Horus is also known as the Wijat eye, which means the sound one, the whole one. It's known as the Wijat eye. So these are some of the things that the ancient Egyptians believed in, some of the concepts. Okay. So whenever you see the Eye of Horus, you're really seeing a story about making your consciousness whole again. That's what it represents. That's what it is, right? So. Also, now we know the story of Horus. There's also a passage in the Bible, right? In Matthew 6:22, where Jesus says, the light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Okay? So in Matthew 6:22, Jesus is talking about the light of the body, which is supposed to resemble your mind. If thine eye, he doesn't say thine eyes, he says thine eye. If thine eye be single, then your whole body shall be full of light. This is saying that if your mind be not undivided and set upon the Lord, then your body shall be full of light. Now, Jesus, actually, when he was a child, he grew up in Egypt, right? So it would be far-fetched to believe that Jesus, who grew up in Egypt and knew about all the ancient, religions that they practiced back then, would just randomly talk about your eye being separated. And actually, in this passage, when it was translated from the Bible, it's actually translated from the Greek word. It's translated single. It's translated from the Greek word hapless, which means undivided. So he's saying, if thine eye be undivided, like this eye is divided, and made whole, then your whole body shall be full of light. So you can imagine Jesus growing up in ancient Egypt. Like, let's say if he grew up in America with us, and he said, many men wish death upon me, blood in my eyes and I can't see. Like, imagine if he said that and he never heard of the 50 Cent song. Like, he didn't put that together. Or imagine if he said, ain't no sunshine when she's gone, but never heard the song. Like, he most likely heard the song and knew, so this is like another analogous reference to the Eye of Horus here, and you can see that in the Bible as well. The parallels and the same similarities here. Okay, so let's go into this eye here being divided. Let me connect these so we got it better. Okay. Now the analogy when this eye was divided was here. So actually this is kind of backwards, so I'm gonna have to draw it like this. Okay. Bear with me here. Okay, so we got, okay, and this one is now. So, hearing, taste, and touch. Okay, so when Set ripped out Horus's eye and split it into pieces, this was analogous of saying that his senses were split into pieces, and these are the way that the Egyptians divided up the eye to represent. Also, they correspond to different fractions, right? The first one is the sense of smell. You can see that this portion is this portion of the eye here, right? And that was supposed to represent smell, which also coincided with the fraction of 1/2, okay? Then the next one is sight, and this also is supposed to be like a nose here. The next one is sight, which represents the pupil here, which is a pupil. You get a fraction of 1/4. The next one is the eyebrow here, which is supposed to be thought, because they had 6 senses in ancient Egypt, not just the 5. And they symbolize the thought because the eyebrow shows your expressions. If you're mad, they go down. If they go up, you're happy. You also get hearing here, the other side of the eye at 1/16. This is supposed to represent a tongue, which is taste at 1/32, and touch, which is supposed to represent like a finger here at 1/64. Okay. So it was said that Thoth reconstructed the eye and put it all back together, which is your mind being one and being whole again. Okay. So also you will notice that each of these fractions are multiplied by 2. Okay, so 1/2, or rather divided by 2 rather. 1/2 divided by 2, you get 1/4. Divide that by 2, you get 1/8. A fourth divided by 2 is 8. Then you go to 1/16, 1/32, and then 1/64, okay? So also another neat thing about this Eye of Horus is that when you split it in half, you split the brain in half actually, and you line up the Eye of Horus with certain structures in the brain, it actually matches up to each of the functions that they described as the 5 senses. So if you line it up with the figures of the brain, like this one is actually a figure in the brain, a structure in the brain that controls your thought. This one is actually a structure in the brain that controls your sight. So there was no evidence that Egyptians ever did lobotomies, took brains out and did research on it, but it's a huge coincidence that it lines up with the actual structures that actually control the function in the body, right? So these are the fractions here. And another cool thing about this is that Egyptians thought of these senses less as bodily senses and more as energetic senses, okay? They associated these senses with a part of your spirit rather than a part of your body. How we think about hearing, we think about the ear, we think about touching, we think about our hands and our eyes. They associated these senses with your energetic body, and they believed also that you could actually use these senses beyond death. So after you die, you would still have portions of these connected with your soul, right? Another thing that's very interesting is that all modern computers today, they run off of 64, they're 64-bit computers, right? That's how they compute. So they also show binary scaling, which is the same thing that I said, that each time is divided by 2 to get to the next one. Because computers, they compute in ones and zeros, right? Binary, that's how they think. Like how humans, we count to 10, we count to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Humans only use ones and zeros to count all numbers, right? And it's the same process of how our mind works, where 64-bit computers are able to hold and store more memory than the old 32-bit computers, right? But if we took the time to add all of these fractions up, we would notice something that probably isn't too obvious here, that they only go up to 63 over 64, right? And there's one 64th missing to make it whole, okay? So that was analogous to the ancient Egyptians believe it's the magic of the god Thoth, that even if you do see the whole picture in your brain with all your senses, there is still something outside of your awareness that makes your thoughts complete and is still controlling, what's going on here. And that is also seen in computing as well, because computers cannot actually compute every single number. We know this because of calculators. You put a certain division into the calculator, certain numbers run on forever, like pi, 3.141596, and it goes on forever and ever and ever. Now, in order for the computer to understand that, it cannot, the body of the computer cannot contain infinity. It can't think about it. So it uses the magic principle of the one extra one to round the numbers up or to make it a whole concept. So, they also notice that analogous structure, that's how the mind works, and that's magically how computers work, right? I tend to believe that computers were based upon the science that they understood about this eye here. But moving on, let's talk about something very interesting here. Now, you'll notice that each of these pieces of the eye coincide with fractions, and the largest fraction here is actually smell, 1/2. 1/2 is bigger than 1/4. 1/4 is smaller. 1/8 is even smaller. 1/16 is even smaller, So the largest fraction here is a half, right? why would they make smell a half? And it's not that they necessarily made smell a half, it's the things that they understood that in today's times that we forgot, that they understood that smell is the most powerful scent that we have. Now, let's talk about why smell being at one half is the most powerful scent that we have, that the science that the Egyptians understood that we no longer understand today. Okay. So ancient Egyptians, they were very aware of the power of scent. Okay. It was believed that well, every human produces an odor. They produces their own individual odors. It was believed that your odor was connected with your soul. The things that you eat, the things that you think about, emotions. They believed that you can smell scents, and humans reacted upon the scents that they smelled, and they understood things on a deeper level, right? Also in ancient Egypt, perfume making was a sacred business, okay? So you had to be a priest to make perfumes and make incenses. And when they had rituals, they would use certain smells in order to evoke certain memories. So they would coincide a smell for a particular ritual, so that every time you smelled that smell, you would remember the meaning of the ritual, the meaning of whatever was going on. And we can see this practice today when, we have anointing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the concept of anointing and why incenses are closely related to a lot of spiritual practices and meditation and stuff like that, right? So they believe that Osiris was the god of plants, right? They believe Osiris, which is Horus's father, was the god of the physical plant body, and they had another god, Nefertum, who was the god of oils and scents, right? So they believe that oils were the spirit of something, because the smell comes from the oils. When you take an oil, the essence of something is considered its spirit, and that's where we get essential oils from, right? Because they have the spiritual oils. The spirit of the plant is now contained in this essence, which is the pure form of the plant, right? So it's another connection here. And they also believe that good smells coincided with their god of order, who was Ma'at. Ma'at was the god of order, and the god of chaos represented bad smells. Okay, so a lot of times back in those days, they didn't have pharmaceutical companies. What they had were the plants. They had to go out and really study the plants and understand how to live one with the nature in order to keep their bodies healthy. And a way that they were able to navigate the jungles and the vast forests was through the use of their noses. Okay, they relied heavily on their noses, and they also thought of smelling as the same as the thought of breathing. So the nose was associated with keeping a person alive. Okay. So that is some of the things that the Egyptians believed about the nose and smelling. But let's look at science today and see what science today says about it. Whether they were right or whether they were wrong. Okay. Let's see what we know today. I'm going to go ahead and erase this Eye of Horus here. sure. Let's do it. Okay, I tend to draw with a lean. All right, so this is some of the things that we know today in science, and I encourage you guys to look all of this stuff up so you don't just take it from me, right? All right, so neurology has proven that 75% of our daily emotions are controlled by smell. That's a high percentage. So however you feel whenever you're walking around throughout the day, has been proven that it's controlled by your smell. Now, why is this controlled by the smell? Because unlike other senses, right? Other senses, your touch, your sight, your hearing, your taste, they all have to be routed through what's called the thalamus in the brain. So it goes through your thalamus first before you become consciously aware that you're touching something, that you're listening to something. It routes through your thalamus, and then you become conscious of it, right? Your smell, however, bypasses the thalamus and goes straight to your amygdala, which controls your emotions, and the hippocampus, which controls your memory. So the smell is the only scent that bypasses the brain and goes directly to these centers. And also in ancient Egypt, it was believed that the heart was the center of intelligence and not the mind. So it's thought that the smell bypasses the mind and goes directly to the heart, where the emotions are seated in the amygdala. Let's talk about meditation here for a second. Okay. In meditation, smell helps unlock doors to the unconscious when you're meditating, right? We meditate. The point of meditation, I'll say the point of meditation today has been lost. People do it, but they don't really understand what they're doing, right? So whenever you're told to meditate, it's been proven that meditation can help you regulate certain emotions. It can also bring you to a calmer state of mind, right? Give you clarity, help you remember things, right? The point of meditation is when you meditate, you're told to close your eyes, right? That's your sight. Quiet your mind, right? That's your thought. Don't have any distractions in your hand. That's your touch, right? It's good to meditate in a fasting state, right? So you're not eating anything. That's your taste, right? Eyes, mind, hearing. Make sure you're in a quiet environment when you meditate, right? That's your ears, right? And the only point of meditation is what? I think we all have heard of this. Breathe deeply. In through the nose, out through the mouth. So in ancient Egypt, they understood that breathing deeply was heavily associated with smell. The point of meditation is to turn all senses off, turn off the brain, and only go through the route of the smell, which bypasses the mind, right? So a lot of people don't really understand that science today, but this is something that ancient Egyptians heavily understood, that the science of meditation was really to really boost your power of smell, which also boosts your intuition. This is why animals are able to have intuitive insight to things that are going on, miles away, because they're very in tune with other cues that we aren't aware of. Okay. Also, the National Institute of Health.com states that emotions have smells, and humans emit specific chemical signals called chemosignals through your sweat and your tears. And based upon your emotional state, like fear, stress, happiness, people are reacting to it subconsciously. So if you are feeling a certain way, if you're mad, if you're whatever, and you're sweating, like sometimes anxiousness makes you sweat and stuff, people can pick up on that subconsciously, and they begin to react to those same chemical cues that you're giving off. Additionally, researchers have found that the tears of women let out a secretion, a chemo signal, that actively reduces aggression in other people. So women's tears make people more calm. This has been scientifically proven, and I encourage you all to look this information up, so you can see it for yourself. Okay. Now let's talk about this concept of anointing. Okay. A lot of religions talk about anointing, right? Today, anointing is often talked about like a spiritual practice, like, oh, that person is anointed because he's wise or he's righteous or something, right? But anointing was actually a physical practice. It was a practice of smearing aromatic oil or perfume on a person or object to sanctify them or set them apart, to show their authority and also show that they're covered by a divine spirit. So the practice of anointing is a physical aspect where you're rubbing oil on something. That's why even today, we'll see people using olive oil, right? But in the Bible, the real purpose of anointing was to have other people aware. How do you know when a person is anointed? Back then, they knew a person was anointed because they had access to the priestly perfumes, because remember, perfuming was a sacred business. They could smell it on a person. Oh, you're righteous, you're of a holy caliber. Whereas maybe the fisherman was not really seen as high up in that hierarchy of time back then. So the Bible actually gives you a recipe for anointing, all right? The recipe is olive oil, myrrh, cinnamon and cassia, and fragrant cane. So it has cinnamon, myrrh. These are all tree resins that have a thick smell, but today generally a lot of people just tend to use olive oil, but they're missing the actual fragrant smells that are supposed to, when you wear anointing, it's supposed to remind you in certain situations that when you smell it, smells are heavily connected to emotions and memory. They tie back to your emotions and memory, right? And we're going to talk about the Proust effect, where you can smell an emotion and be transported back to a certain place. But when you smell something, it's also been scientifically proven that you can smell something and study, and if you smell that same thing right before you take the test, you'll have a higher percentage of memory recall than what you would if you don't have essential oils and stuff that you smell. So the anointing was also for the user to remind them that they are supposed to be holding themselves to a higher standard. Now let's talk about what's known as the Proust effect, okay? This guy named Proust, he wrote a book, and it's like a famous passage where he talks about eating a piece of cake and he dips it in his tea, and right before he puts it in his mouth, he has a smell that in the book transports him back to a time where he remembers or whatnot, okay? But researchers found that this effect is actually real. The Proust effect creates a sudden and overwhelming sensation of being transported back in time, okay? The time traveling sensation is the scent triggered memories are involuntary and make you feel like you've been physically transported back to the exact moment that smell triggered, right? And sometimes when people report that they're having a Proust effect, like you'll smell something and you'll begin to cry. Like it evokes an immediate emotional response where you're not even aware of why it's happening. But because it passes your mind, you're not aware. It goes straight to your emotional sensors and triggers a scent trigger that when you smell something, you might think of a childhood memory. You smell something, you might think of your grandma. Oh, she used to smell like this. Or you smell another person, a male or a woman that you might be interested in, and you don't realize that some kind of odor that they're giving off is the same odor that your parents had or that your brothers had that you're familiar with, that brings back up certain memories. Okay. And now let's talk about how doctors use scent to treat memory loss, okay? So, scent therapies have been used to physically rebuild neural pathways. Through scent therapy, think about how powerful that is. That the scent is rebuilding structures in your mind where you can drink and you can kill the structures in your mind. You're killing your brain cells when you drink alcohol and do things like that. But doctors have used scent therapies to rebuild structures in the mind. They exposed older adults to concentrated essential oils for 2 hours before they or while they sleep with a essential oil diffuser, and the study showed that the seniors were able to have a memory recall of 226% greater than before they were on the study. This is over a course of 6 months where they did these scent treatments, and they used rose oil, they used orange, they used eucalyptus, lemon, peppermint, rosemary, and lavender, right? And after 6 months, the senior citizens were able to have a memory recall of 226% greater than what they had before, right? They did brain scans, and the brain scans confirmed that there was a physical thickening in the brain's pathways, that the scent treatments that they were conducting every night were literally rebuilding the mind. So you can actually do this for yourself. Get you some essential oils and have a diffuser before you go to bed at night, and you will be actively repairing pathways in your mind while you're sleeping. They also did another study where patients sniffed 4 or 5 distinct high concentration essential oils twice a day while actively focusing on a specific memory. Okay, and the targeted exercise stimulated neuroplasticity, which increased the gray matter volume in their hippocampus, right? So again, it's showing that the smell is actually producing a physical effect in the brain. And this is the stuff that I don't know how much of it specifically that the ancient Egyptians understood, but somehow they intuitively knew that the smell was a very important function of the human body. All right. So that's enough on the nose and how important the smell is here. Okay. Now I'll talk about why I go by suit. And again, today's topic is we're talking about the hieroglyphics. So these are different parts of the hieroglyphic. These are another hieroglyphic here. Okay, so this is the name that I go by, which is Nesut Biti. That's the way it's pronounced, Nesut Biti. It means of the sedge and the bee. Okay. Write some things here. Okay. Now, in English, we say pharaoh, but in ancient Egypt, they would refer to the pharaoh as Nesut Biti. Okay. Sut, this part here, means sedge, and the J's back then, because they didn't write with vowels. Egyptians didn't have vowels. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the syntax of hieroglyphics here in a second. But BT was the word that they used for B, right? And I believe it would have been like this, right? Something like this. And then let's see, like this, right? It's probably something like how they would have wrote it, right? The sedge, a sedge is a plant that grew by the Nile. And one of the most popular sedges that they had was called the papyrus. Papyrus. This is where paper comes from. This is one of the original forms of paper. They used the sedge, they broke it down, and they made paper. It was associated with intellect, okay? The sedge was the symbol of Upper Egypt. There's two parts to Egypt. There's an Upper Egypt and there's a Lower Egypt. So the sedge was the symbol of Upper Egypt, right? And also the bee represented honey. Egyptians were honey farmers. They had a large, vast population of honey farmers, and that was one of their main import or exports, rather. The bee was also the symbol of Lower Egypt, just like the eagle is the symbol of America, right? So the bee was the symbol of Lower Egypt and also the lower self. Now let's talk about why they are the symbols of the higher and lower self, right? So this is called the praenomen for the pharaoh. The pharaoh had 5 royal names. This is the one that was most commonly used. Nesut Biti was his throne name. So they would say like Nesut Biti Tutankhamun. So Pharaoh Tut, you know. So this means of the sedge and the bee, the master of Upper and Lower Egypt, but also the master of the upper and lower self. That means the pharaoh was the one who had mastered his upper and lower self, right? The papyrus, which was the first form of paper, very few people knew how to write. It was a symbol of intellect, right? The upper self is associated with the heart, the mind, and the voice. Intellect, you know, matters of the heart, matters of the voice, using your words wisely. When you're able to control your speech, you're able to control your thoughts, right? Control your emotions, right? That was the sedge. The bee, which was associated with honey, was associated with power, sex, and the gut, food, like your urges, right? So when you master your sexual desires, you master your desire to consume, and you also master power, because the biggest muscles in your body are your maximus gluteus. That's the largest muscle in your body, which is your legs. That gives you your power. So that's the lower self. So the pharaoh will start to have mastered his upper and lower natures, right? And so that's why I like to go by the Nesut Biti, because, you know, I'm on the pathway of mastering my upper and lower natures. You know, I really integrate things that, you know, I believe that are for my betterment. But this is how they would draw it. It's the symbol for a sedge and then the bee here. Okay, Nesut Biti. Okay, and now we're going to talk about, get into a little bit of hieroglyphic grammar and talk about, you know, why was it you got these 4 letters here, but you only got 2 symbols to write that? Like, why is that the case? Okay, so that is my name. And also, you may see, so hieroglyphics, again, they didn't have vowels. So a lot of times to fill the spaces in between, they would write an E unless they already knew the pronunciation. But you also may see this written out like this. Sometimes I spell it like this. Or they might write it like this. Okay? Because sometimes they said that Egyptians didn't really pronounce the T at the end of words, right? But I use it, sometimes I just write it like that, or I might write it this way. I like to pronounce the T because I like the in means of, right? And then the sedge, and then the B. So that's the in denotes of, so the master of, the sedge, and the B, right? But I like to use suit because the name of the podcast that I shoot for is called Follow Suit, you know, Follow Suit. So it's a play on words and whatnot. So you would see different people writing in different ways whenever it's translated into English. So you might see some of that once you guys go into doing your research. Okay. Now let's talk about some Egyptian grammar. Okay. The Egyptian pictograms were known as hieroglyphics. Okay, the word hiero in Greek means sacred, right? And the word glyph meant carving, right? So they believed that the hieroglyphics were sacred carvings or the writing of the gods. That's what they believed that the hieroglyphics was. Gods communicated. That's what that means, sacred carvings, right? They are pictorial symbols that represent words, sounds, and concepts, okay? We have the same thing if you think about emojis. Emojis are pretty much hieroglyphics, and they're used in the same ways. And I'll show you how some of our emojis are used in the same ways, right? Hieroglyphics could be written and read from right to left and also from left to right, depending on the way that that it faced would tell you the way to read the sentence. So if you see the faces pointing this way, this is a sedge plant, but it's pointing this way, that means that you read it from this way. You start here and you read over there. If you see the faces pointing the opposite way, that means you read from this side and you start this way. So the way that the faces in the pictorial symbols were facing told you how to read the sentence. Now you can also find hieroglyphics that are written vertically, up and down. And a lot of times these are separated by thick, bold lines, and you start from the top and you read it to the bottom. So they can be written from left to right or right to left, and from top to bottom. Okay. And remember, hieroglyphics didn't have any vowels in them, but today we've translated the hieroglyphics to some of the English vowels, just to make it easier for us to understand them. But the writing in itself, they never had vowels. They had certain sounds that were associated with the hieroglyphics, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. Let's talk about some of the ways that these hieroglyphics are used. And determinatives. Determinatives. Okay. I always got a little slight lean. I need to work on that lean, man. Let me get that. Let me get it together, man. That's my trademark. I don't like that, but. Okay. Okay, they're right like that. Bow. So these are the forms of how the hieroglyphics were used, right? And again, I said the hieroglyphics are really similar to emojis. So let's talk about what is an ideogram form of a hieroglyphic. The ideogram represented a concept, right? So if you think about some of the emojis that we have that represent concepts and don't represent a word, they don't really represent the word. So the concept, you can use multiple words to describe it. It just gives a feeling of what it is. An example of this would be the heart, right? So when you see that, everybody understands what that is across cultures. You don't really need to know the language. You just look at the picture and get the feeling. The heart can represent love. It can be like, or it can literally mean heart, depending on how you're using it, right? Another concept of this might be maybe that's not a good one, because I think you might need to, there's not an ideogram there. What's another concept that is understood across cultures? Okay, bye. This is one that they actually use. Should be mouth. And when it was used in an ideogram, when they wanted you to think about it as an ideogram, they would put a slash here on the side of it or underneath it, depending on how it's written, right? This was the ideogram for mouth, right? So the mouth can mean mouth, it can mean lips, you know, it can mean a number of different things, but that picture was supposed to represent concepts that can be translated across cultures when you look at the picture, right? Logograms are something that you need to understand the language in order to interpret it, right? So a logogram represents a word. So for instance, if you don't know what this symbol means across cultures, that's called an ampersand in English. There's no way you're gonna know that unless you know English, right? Also, dollar sign. I know we think everybody knows what that means, but you know, not everybody is using dollars. Some people use yen, and there's other currencies. Think about all the currencies that you don't know the symbol for, right? You have to know the language in order to understand the logogram, right? So the logogram represents an actual word. Another one could be the at symbol, right? At, okay. Now, sometimes the hieroglyphs were used as phonograms, which represents a sound. So sometimes they want you to use it as, let's take at for example. At, if we're using it as a logogram, then that at is supposed to represent at. So at yahoo.com. I want you to understand that literally as the at symbol, right? If I'm using it as a phonogram, a sound, we're no longer using it for what it's really supposed to be used for. So now we write it like this. Bat, right? And we understand that means not at. That means swing something, right? Or they say don't be what? Don't be late, right? So that's, instead of it being the logogram for 8, it is the phonogram, you know? So sometimes the Egyptian symbols were used like that to represent a sound, where they have two meanings to it, right? And determinatives, they gave context to sentences, right? So for determinative, that's a mouthful, right? Think about it like this. If I give you the sentence, we close at 8 today, and I give an emoji like this. What's the one? I like the one when they go like this. And she's blowing that little thing, I don't know. You ever seen that party emoji where they're blowing the little rollout thing, you know? And it's got a little hat, a little birthday hat on. You know, if I say we close at 8 today, that's a happy sentence, doesn't it seem like, right? So the happy face at the end would be the determinative. But I can also say the same sentence, we close at 8 today, and give you this one. You know, the rolling eyes symbol, right? That kind of changes the meaning of it. Like, oh, it's no longer a happy thing. Now it's a bad thing. So the determinative lets you know what the sentence is about. So sometimes they use certain determinatives to kind of give text to how you should be reading the sentence. So these are the ways in which the hieroglyphs are used, okay? Also, now we talked about how one single hieroglyph can be used multiple ways, and the phonograms actually gave the writers a way to actually spell out different words, right? So the phonograms can be unilateral. I'll leave this up. You guys got this? Let me go erase it, okay? Or not unilateral, I apologize. Uniliteral. So the phonograms, whenever the hieroglyphs are used to represent a sound, they can be uniliteral, which translates to our consonants, like C, B, might be A. So one hieroglyph would represent K, B, the sound of the letter, K, B, H, right? Then biliteral, one hieroglyph would represent the sound of two letters, Ch, Sh, F. You know, so they would have one hieroglyph to represent the sound of two letters, right? And also triliteral, where it might be like the Ankh and inter. So sometimes they had hieroglyphs that represent the sound of three letters put together, right? And using these hieroglyphs, they will put them together and make certain words, okay? Now let's go into something fun here. Let's have a little bit of fun here with this. Got that. Let's actually look at some hieroglyphs here. Okay. These are the actual hieroglyphs. So using these, you'll be able to spell your name, you can write things, you know. And they also have some of the logogrammic meanings with it too. All right, this can be written certain ways. The arm, you can see an arm here, so you can write that to actually mean an arm, or you can write that to represent the sound This is a vulture here, also represents right? I would have spent all day if I had to draw this up here, so I took the time to write it. All right, B was represented by a leg here. You can see the leg. C, the sound K, was represented by a cup, also a cloth here. D, represented by a hand. E was represented by feathers, but this is the sound E, not really the right E. So you can write that, you can use that feather multiple different ways, and you'll see the same hieroglyphs being used multiple different ways for the same letter here. Sound F was represented by a viper. G was for a pot, represented by a pot here. H was represented by a wick. There's multiple letters for H, multiple hieroglyphs. I have none. I don't have any of the. I think I have one biliteral here, but they have other biliterals and triliterals that you can also look up. And I didn't have room to put the numbers, so we'll probably do the numbers another time. But I was also represented by a feather, just like E was, because they kind of have the same sound here. All right. J is represented by a cobra. K is represented by a cup, just like C. K, K, have the same sound. L is represented by a lion. M represented by an owl. Okay. N is represented by this pointy wiggly line here, which is water, supposed to represent water. So you can just write that out or spell it out. O is represented by this rope here, let's say. P is represented by a stool. Q is represented by a hill. K. R is represented by mouth, the mouth. S is represented by a cloth, just like the C was here. T represented by a loaf. U is represented by a chick. V is represented by a viper, just like the F was. W is represented by another chick, just like the U, W. X, cup and a rope, same as C. I mean, cup and cloth, rather. Y is represented by feathers. And this is also 2 slashes, the way that you can represent Y. You can also use the 2 slashes to represent E and I. So they all pretty much have the same pictogram for each of those sounds. Z is represented by a bolt, right? SH, the sound sh, is represented by a basin. It's supposed to be a basin. And this is the symbol for a man. This is the symbol that they would use for a woman. And this is the symbol that they would use for an aunt, right? So with these, you can probably look at some hieroglyphs and begin to start, putting them together and understanding certain things, whether they're talking about the specific thing, like you might see them put a man there, or whether they're spelling something out. You can start to read and realize, what am I actually looking at here when I see all these pictures? So now you can look at it with new eyes and get a new excitement with it. So I hope you guys take pictures of this so you'll have it. But let's do another, a quick little exercise. If you want to go ahead and take a picture of it. Introduction to hieroglyphs. And you can find this online as well. You can look up the Hieroglyphic Alphabet and go online, discover how to spell your name. So you might see, like in Egypt, people have the little hieroglyphic chains that actually spell out something that means something to them. So let's do a little exercise if you guys are done with this. Okay, bear with me while I get my draw on. This is what I found online. Don't kill me if they look terrible. More room, girl. Oh, I got y'all. Okay, hold on. Let's see the back end open. Okay. Okay. So we're going to go through and we're going to read this. This is the actual Egyptian hieroglyph that was written out to spell a person's name. Okay. So let's go through how we actually read this and what this name is. Okay. Which way would we start? Do we know? Which way would we start reading? Raise your hand if you think we start from this side. Okay. Raise your hand if you think we start from this side. Okay, good job. Yeah, we start from this side because all the faces are pointing that way. That shows the way that we should start reading. Okay. So we start reading from this side, and we also start from the top bottom. So the direction is going to go like this, then like this, then like this, then like this, and like this, all the way down, right? Start from top, going down all the way over, right? So that's how the direction is going to go. Now, I know I drew these things on the back, so I'm going to just translate them for you. This being 1, following this directional path. This is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. All the way up to 11, because we have 11 pictograms here. And each one of these are used in its the phonographic states. Okay. So okay. 1, the hill. Told you represented the Q. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the hill represented the Q. To the lion represented the L. The feather represented the I, E sound, right? What did this one represent? Does anybody know? Can you remember? Can you see it on the pictures? O, you're right. What did this little box represent?
P.
Good job, P. She already know hieroglyphics. Look, it's crazy. What did this represent? The big bird. A. All right. The hand is what? D. Yeah. Sorry, I'm writing some lowercase and some uppercase. D. The mouth.
R.
R. Yeah. The bird again. Another A. And this one.
T.
T. Now, this here, I didn't tell you guys, sometimes they would just use a little participle to fill in a space because the writing that they did was more about, it was a very beautified language. A lot of it had to do with spirituality, which is symbolism, and they wanted things to be sacred and also symmetrical. So they use this little particle here to fill space. So this doesn't really mean anything here. The last 11 one didn't really mean anything. So I'm just going to write that. It's just there to fill up the space. But that, I just wrote it to stay true to how it actually looks, okay? So now let's put this together. We get, this is someone's name. Do you know what name that is? Huh? What name is it?
Cleopatra.
Huh? Say it loud. I can't hear you. I gotta make sure you got it right.
Cleopatra. That's
The Q silent.
No, the Q is pronounced like a K. It's like K.
like,
So what name you think it is? Have you ever heard the name before?
No.
You've
it's
never
like
heard that
similar
name
to
before.
Cleopatra.
What?
It's similar to Cleopatra.
That's right. That's what it is.
Okay.
This is Cleopatra's name.
Oh.
Cleopatra's name. That's how they spelled it out. But it uses the sounds to write it, but it doesn't necessarily line up because it's phonetic. You want to listen to it and see how it sounds, you know. So good job. You were able to read it and make that connection now. Now you can basically read hieroglyphics just a little bit, so you know what you're looking at. So congratulations. That concludes my class for today. You know, just an introduction to what the hieroglyphics are. But this is. Go ahead.
So
What questions do we have?
why did you choose the name Sut?
Sut?
Sut, yeah.
So I chose that name because I personally take a path of self-mastery in life where I try to integrate the things that I learn about, right? So I'm as you can see, I'm highly an intellectual. I try to control my thoughts, control my emotions, control the things that I say, and I also spend a lot of time fasting, a lot of time, exercising, restraining my sexual urges, right? So I felt like that name, Nesut Biti, actually, when I read about it, when I learned about it, I felt like that exemplified who I strive to be in life. And a lot of times in ancient Egypt, people had names, and then they had names that were given to them. A lot of those ancient Egyptians had multiple names because they had names that were given to them based upon their character, right? So I felt like Nesut Biti was a fitting name for my character and who I strive to be in life. So that's why I chose Nesut Biti. And for short, I allow people to call me Sut because it represents the sedge, which is the, remember the papyrus represents the paper, and intellect. So I highly pride myself on my intellect and my higher nature rather than my B, lower nature. And we all have the sedge and the B in each and every one of us, the Horus and the Set. And the Set was the lower nature, which is why that analogous story that I told you about the Eye of Horus being ripped out and ripped into pieces is about your lower nature ripping your consciousness into pieces. When you follow your lower nature, your mind is no longer one. You have what's known as cognitive dissonance. You're doing things that you may not necessarily believe in, but when you control by the higher nature, your Horus, right, you're able to repiece your mind together and you start moving in alignment with the things that you want to do, and you're not allowing your lower nature, your body, to control the things that you want to do. All right. Any more questions? What else you got? All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the class today. I hope you guys learned something, and that concludes it for today. If you guys want to take pictures and stuff, I'll leave this up so you guys can take pictures. But thank you guys for attending, and I'll see you another time.
Thank you.